Hello, members. Welcome and good evening, everybody. Hello, Catherine. Good evening, Catherine. And Emma is just joining us as well. They both rushed to grab their pigs and blankets out of the oven almost at the same time. So they're heading back from their ovens. So welcome, everyone. I could not be happier and more excited to be sharing this event alongside two of my fellow birds from the tasting team, Catherine and, pardon me. Catherine and Emma. As some of you have already started, you are very welcome to let us know where you are and what you're drinking this evening. Please feel free to use the chat to do that. We are going to be taking questions as we go. Because we've got 6 wines, we're going to try and answer questions about the wines during that wine to avoid confusion. So if you are planning on asking a question, it would really help us out if you put that into the Q&A. Don't worry if you put it in the chat. There are 3 of us tonight, so we can manage. But if you pop it into the Q&A, then it just means we'll be able to see it a little more easily. So please do that if you're able to. Other than that, a small bit about how this evening's going to work. We hope you enjoyed the pun, the 3-bird roast. We are here to celebrate 6 wines, 2 can't speak now, I'm so excited, Catherine. We have each chosen 2 wines this evening. So we're not going to taste them in our pairs. We're going to taste them in what we think is a sensible tasting order, but we're each going to talk about our wines in turn. The point of this evening is that you find at home, members, a wine that interests you and that excites you, but we are going to add a little competitive edge to it. So at the end of the tasting, of course, we're going to put a poll up and allow you to vote for your favourite wine. We know lots of you are tasting in groups or pairs this evening. So if you are doing so, I've made it multiple choice. And then that means that you can select more than one wine because we don't want any pre-Christmas arguments. That is not ideal. An argument about Christmas wine pairing on the 1st of December would be a record we do not want to break. So I've prepared some food. Please don't worry, members, if you haven't. This is one of the most unusual plates I've ever seen because I've also popped some duck on the top of my bread sauce. There's things going on here I don't wish to repeat, but don't worry if you haven't cooked anything. Emma, Catherine and I have each cooked some foods that we think will help us explain our choices this evening. But by all means, if you're just tasting along with the wines, that is no problem at all. And hopefully nobody's sort of making a mash of bread sauce with a duck on top of it. Nobody do that at Christmas. But we have got wines that will go with a selection of goose, turkey, duck, as I mentioned. I've actually got chicken tonight as well. Didn't fancy cooking a whole goose on Thursday, the 1st of December. So we've got a range of poultry, and we'll talk about lots of different poultry as we go through. I think some of my wines might even go with pheasant. So we'll certainly be discussing lots and lots of different birds. So without further ado, I hope that everybody who's got a tasting pack this evening has poured the wines. If you've bought them by bottle, please also, if you can and have enough glasses, pour them if you can. If you don't have enough glasses to pour all 6 ready to go, when you get onto the wine, just make sure you give them a good swirl because a lot of the later wines in particular need some oxygen to allow them to shine. So without further ado, somebody's already said they love the 3-bird pun. Good. It's really rare that the 3 of us get to do an online event together. So I'm absolutely chuffed to be doing this tonight. It really is going to be hopefully a bit of a laugh. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to bird number 1, which is Catherine. And Catherine's going to present our first wine. So cheers to you, Catherine.
Cheers. Thank you, Anna. Hello, Emma. Hello, Anna. Hello, members. Anna, I do think I can slightly top your interesting plate because I have a plate solely of pigs in blankets, which are neither a bird nor roasted, but I will talk about why they work. But I have had plenty of poultry in my time with some of the wines that the 2 wines I've chosen. So I feel I'm well positioned to argue my case, and I hope I win out of the little competition. So members, the main thing though is that I hope you enjoy it and that you get an idea as to the sort of wines that you can have with your animals, your birds this Christmas. And I'm very pleased to be kicking us off with the first one. Now, this is the Elk Cove Vineyards Willamette Valley Estate Pinot Blanc 2021, which is quite a mouthful. Willamette in itself is quite a mouthful. I only now know how to say it in that pronunciation rather than Willamette or anything else, because Sarah Knowles likes to have a little phrase which helps, and it's really helped me, which is Willamette damn it. So if you have anything that you need to pronounce, as you know, me and Anna might not be the best people to turn to for wine names, but that one I can be sure of, and I'd love to tell you more about it. Firstly, if you do have it, do pop in the chat what you think of it. Don't wait for me to finish talking to have some thoughts, but I'll talk a little bit about what I can smell and what I can taste first, then I'll tell you about the wine, and then we'll see if my fellow birds agree. So, I mean, it's described as a pure and precise Oregon Pinot Blanc, and I think it is. It's got some really lovely, fresh, ripe orchard fruits in there. Lots of nice peachy flavors, a bit of quince almost as well, maybe a little bit of apricot too. And I think there's a little spice edge that I can smell. It's a bit like that white pepper, maybe a slight bit of nutmeg in there as well. And then when you taste it, it's got a lovely fresh acidity, lots of minerality. Minerality is one of our fun winey buzzwords, but it's that lovely texture that you get in your mouth as well, which makes it a really lovely food wine. So I'll just have a sip and then I will tell you about the Elk Cove Vineyards. Delicious, lovely wine. So Elk Cove, so the Willamette Valley is up in the north of Oregon. So you've got the map on there for you now in that yellow section. And Elk Cove Vineyards was founded in 1974 by Pat and Joe Campbell and their son Adam, who took over the winemaking in 1995, along with his brothers and sisters and parents. They all moved up to an old abandoned homestead in the foothills of the Coast Range Mountains. I don't know, Anna, if on the map you're able to sort of highlight where those are, but it was very overgrown, very abandoned. But Pat and Joe decided to choose that property because it had shallow soils, it had lovely steep hilly terrain and beautiful views. They decided to convert the existing homestead into existing homestead barn into a winery, and then they built a family home with the reclaimed lumber. But obviously this took quite a bit of time to do. Joe was still working nights in the local ER while Pat was managing the business, and they were roping in their friends to help. So in the winter of 1974, they had a herd of 40 Roosevelt elk that bedded down in the clearing by the trailer that they were all living in at the time. And then because of their presence and the lovely the protective bowl shape area of the property, they decided to name it Elk Cove, which is just quite magical. And I know an elk isn't quite a reindeer, but it does feel quite fitting, particularly, for this tasting, but it's lovely. So there is some family history with winemaking in Pat's family. Her great-grandfather was a Smith immigrant to Helvetia in Oregon, and he grew grapes and made wines prior to Prohibition. And then her parents were orchardists, so they grew sort of apples and pears and things in their farms at the foot of Mount Hood. And her father Lou, upon seeing where they had bought for their new vineyard site that was overgrown with some prune and hazelnut trees, commented that with the soil and no water, they don't think he'd be able to grow anything there except perhaps wine grapes. So that's quite fortuitous for them. And they didn't know it at the time, but they were pioneers of quite a new industry in Oregon. They won some awards for their wines in the late 70s, early 80s. And then it was in 1985 that Robert Parker of the Wine Advocate famously discovered Oregon. The Campbells and other Oregon winemakers found that their region was finally on the map. And now 40 years later, there's over 700 wineries in Oregon. And wines as a business ranks as one of Oregon's top agricultural industries. Like I said, it's Adam that is now responsible for making Elk Cove's wines. They oversee 6 vineyard sites with 380 planted acres. And their goal has always been for handcrafted, estate-grown, cool climate wines that rival the best in the world. And I think this is up there. And as a second-generation winemaker and fifth-generation Oregon farmer, Adam is really proud to kind of be carrying on that tradition. The tradition is something I think you can taste in the wine, but let's talk a little bit more about the winemaking specifically. So this is the 2021 vintage. And that was an outstanding year at Elk Cove. So the cool weather during the bloom, and there was moderate temperatures during most of the growing season. So they had a really ample harvest of very intensely concentrated fruit. That's a great thing with the Pinot Blanc. It's got a lovely perfume, lovely intensity to it. They then did have some rain during harvest that they thought might be a bit of a problem, but the vines made it through very well. And then there was a bit of some heat issues as well, but they made it through the rain and the heat with real fine condition and lots of variable sized berries, which I discovered are known as hens and chicks, which again is just perfectly fitting for the tasting we're doing this evening. But it meant that they had one of very high quality, but also very bountiful. So it was a real boon of a vintage for them in 2021. In terms of the fruit, it's all hand harvested from their vineyards. So they have a selection of vineyard sites. So this comes from the Five Mountain, Mount Richmond and Estate vineyards. The Mount Richmond vineyard sits on a maritime sediment soil, which is known as Willackenzie in the foothills of the Coast Range Mountains. And it's right in the heart of the Yamhill Carlton AVA. So I don't know if that, in that sort of khaki green section in the yellow area of the map. There we go, just up at it. Perfect. So that is the Yamhill Carlton AVA, we'll get there. And they've got an elevation of just 300 feet, which allows for earlier ripening, which protects from weather events. It also lengthens the harvest, brings out the different flavour components. And the Five Mountain is set on a steep southeast facing slope in the Chehalem Mountains AVA, and they've got spectacular views of the five volcanoes of the Cascade Range. But in the Willamette Valley in general, it's an ideal climate for Pinot Blanc because Pinot Blanc is quite a delicate grape variety. There's enough sunlight and warmth for the ripening, but the cooler night temperatures means that there's that lovely diurnal range, so they can retain the varietal character. They use whole cluster pressed, then fermented at cool temperatures in stainless steel tanks, just to accentuate the aromatics and enhance the richness and the viscosity, because this does have a lovely bit of a viscous texture to it, but it still has that lovely freshness and that varietal character. So I wonder what you think. I mean, I think in terms of pairing with Christmas foods, that lovely freshness with any of the white meated birds, so your turkey, guinea fowl, chicken. I also think with the lovely fruity ripeness and that little bit of spice, great for the buckets of bread sauce that I know I put on my plate, and it seems that Anna has this evening as well. And I know Emma is a big bread sauce fan too. So also if you've got any like fruity stuffing, so apricots, even chestnuts with a bit of nuttiness with this as well. Just I think it's a really, really delicious wine. But I
actually just tried it with the carrots, Catherine, for that reason, because you get that lovely like caramelized note when you have roasted carrots. Particularly, I've done mine in a little bit of spice, but not really. And actually, what that does is, for me, that fruity nature of your wine really marries with what actually can be quite a fruity, like you say, fruity, almost not sweet meal, but there are certainly sweet notes in a lot of the foods on my plate. So it's worked really well.
There's a lot of sweet components to a Christmas dinner, isn't there? I think we forget that, oftentimes you're not just going to have a plate of roasted meat. There's so many things coming in, and, depending on what you stuff your birds with as well, if you're someone that puts the stuffing in the duck, chicken, or if you do it with aromatic herbs, citrus fruits, orange, you've got a lot of flavor to be going with. So it is a fun thing, and when we're looking at the food and wine match, and we've always said it, it's some guidelines to help, but it's not a prescriptive, you must do this. And of course, it's what you like at the end of the day, because it's your dinner.
I've actually just tried it with the sprouts. because I've got some shredded sprouts and quite a lot of red sauce like you, Anna, as well. And it does really work because it's got enough of the kind of citrus zing that it kind of works, kind of lifts with the greenness of the sprout as well.
Perfect.
Just
Not
before we move on, just say not that it's the best wine.
No, it won't be.
Emma's fighting talks coming out now.
I certainly am.
We'll move on. I'm conscious of time, but I would like to say, Catherine, just a comment from Peter Cousins, who said there's a lot more going on for this than most Pinot Blancs for him. And then in Alsace, he usually goes for Pinot Gris, but actually this has a surprising level of complexity. And I think that's quite fair. Pinot Blanc often gets pushed aside as the sort of bland of the Pinot world.
Yeah, I think you hear the name white, like, and you think, oh, white, pure, not much, it's very clean, you know, and yeah, it is easy to overlook it, but don't overlook this one.
Couldn't agree more. And then just before we move on as well, because we did have a question on I think it was Paul and Susan asked about why, even though we've chosen 6 classy wines, I appreciate that, Paul and Susan, why has nobody chosen a claret? Surely the tradition of a main course on Christmas dinner, or is it too conventional for us? And Emma, to be honest, my answer agrees with yours. So just for anyone not looking at the chat, do you mind explaining what your answer was?
Well, so for me, claret works really well with beef. And our family traditionally have roast beef on Boxing Day, just to get away from turkey. So claret, we always get a magnum of Beaumont, and that is traditionally saved for Boxing Day. But I mean, if you like claret and you want claret with your Christmas dinner, you should have whatever you like, really.
And for me, when it's choosing claret with Christmas dinner, it's just making sure that those tannins aren't too high. And I know I'm going to eat my words because I've got the most tannic wine of the group, but just making sure that it's not a big tannin power party. You want something with a bit of age, a bit of softening, some of those spices coming through, like we said. So I think if you are going claret, I would tend to try and make it a slightly older one if you can.
Or you could go for one with a fair amount of fruit.
Yeah, or a Merlot.
Think about the kind of the fruit in the wine almost being like a kind of fruit sauce with your turkey and things. It can work really well.
That's what I'm hoping my final wine's going to do to the duck. Okie doke. So I do have a white wine to share with you as well. So I'm going to present this. What I should say quickly is that I did give my husband a little sip of all 6 of these wines, and he didn't predict either of my wines. I asked him to guess which he thought were me. So this isn't something I've chosen before, but I would say it's something I've often thought about. And I have had white Rhone on Christmas Day. I just haven't had a Northern Rhone, and I've not had a 100% Marsanne as this wine is. But I have definitely had Rhone blends. When I've tended to go white Rhone at Christmas time, they've actually had some Grenache in them, been a bit fruitier, should we say, I guess. But I tasted this and I thought, oh, okay, this really could work. So this comes from Saint-Joseph, and I'll just pop the map. So Saint-Joseph is in the north, and I do appreciate members for anyone saying Saint-Joseph's longer than that. Saint-Joseph is the pink bit, but this particular vineyard, Leroy, is a steep amphitheatre of essentially Saint-Joseph is mainly granite, and it makes a particular style of Marsanne and sometimes Roussanne blends, which are permitted in that appellation. But this particular vineyard, Leroy's, is this steep amphitheatre, like I mentioned, and the soils change and they become clay and limestone. And actually, it's practically Cornas. You can see it on the map. I've tried to make it as obvious as possible, but without not actually making it in Cornas. But essentially, it's not really a Saint-Joseph in many ways. And Marcel's alluded to it in his notes as well. And it's really family-owned estate, which is nice, created by a gentleman called Maurice, who happened to be the mayor of Chateaubourg, which is within Saint-Joseph, right near here. And he was the mayor. I think his father was the mayor before him. And so they owned a lot of land in the region. So Maurice decided to start a winery, did very well. And then his sons, Dominique and Laurent, now run it. And they have become basically some of the most respected winemakers in the entire region of the Long Pink region. But this is their sort of golden child. This is their Leroy vineyard. They do make a blend as well from other areas that also includes some Roussanne. But Leroy is planted only 6 hectares, and it's planted to 5 Syrah and 1 Marsanne. So there really is only one Marsanne plot that they produce this wine from. And it's about 30-year-old, the vines, but this image here hopefully gives you an idea of just how steep these vines are. What does that mean? Well, it means it's really hard to produce wine here. They have to hand harvest everything. They only get 25 hectolitres per hectare. They do a bit of green harvesting to make sure it stays low. I think this is actually Syrah, by the way, for anyone looking, but it's the right place, just the wrong grape. But it shows you the idea. They take the Marsanne, they quickly press it, and then they put it in a barrel. And in that barrel, they allow the alcoholic fermentation in the barrel, which fundamentally supposedly makes a better integrated wine. And they also do MLF. So they mix they encourage some bacteria, should we say, to convert those tartar acids. Some of the acids that Catherine had, actually, some of that more malic green apple, some of those flavors, and they convert them into a more lactic flavor, which gives you some sort of creamy texture, which for me, I really like with things like bread sauce. I like to have that density. And the other thing that's providing the density here is they've taken the dead yeast in those barrels and they've stirred it weekly. And those dead yeast cells within the barrel are going to add a bit of texture, add the richness, add the lusciousness. And then once they've done that barrel, they convert into some more barrels. So they put, for aging this wine, they put 80% of it into brand new oak and 20% of it into oak that's been used once, but they still keep those lees. So they keep those dead yeast cells intact and make sure that that unctuousness is still coming through. And they keep those in barrel for 16 months. So they have actually had a really decent amount of barrel age and new oak. Now, normally, if I looked at a wine and I saw 16%, oh, sorry, does the box say 2021? Ignore what the box says. This is what we've got for sale at the moment, which is 2018. So if the box says 21, that's a mistake, and I apologize. This is definitely the 2018 vintage. The 2021 vintage technically shouldn't be for sale yet. So apologies. So they keep it for 16 months, hence why 21 wouldn't be around. And then we've allowed it to bottle age a bit. Now, yes, I can smell the new oak in this to some extent. So there is some vanilla coming out. And I think I like a little bit of vanilla with Christmas. It makes me feel festive. But there's a lot of other new oak nuances, should we say, that I really like. And I think Emma's probably going to have some of these in hers too. Things like nutmeg. I get nutmeg in spades. And nutmeg is what I want in my bread sauce. It's what I want sometimes in my red cabbage. I like to stir in a bit of nutmeg and a bit of cinnamon, and those are coming through for me in this wine. And it did take a while to open up, so if you've only just poured it, please give it a swirl. It was quite closed when I first poured it. Oh, sorry, my phone's talking to me. The production of these is really quite small, so there's only 3,000 bottles of this wine made, and I think we get the lion's share of it. So it's a personal favorite of mine, and I'd never thought about it for Christmas dinner, and then I tasted it with this in mind and thought, yes. Fruit wise, slightly different to Catherine, so I'm getting a bit more pear and quince, and quince for me is quite a decadent fruit, but also with the lees, all of that nut for me is quite a challenging food and wine combination, but for me this is sweet nuts. Sounds confusing, but it's not like sort of dry, bitter walnuts. It's very, very sweet nuts. And for me, that's parsnips all over. Sweet nut wines and parsnips are heaven. And I also think those sweet nut flavors are going to hopefully stand up to the spice as well. So you've got kind of texture, you've got a bit of acidity, but by no means am I calling this a high acid wine. It's not. Marsanne is not a high acid grape variety, but it is interesting. It is spicy. It is sweet spices, as well as those sort of decadent fruits I was talking about, the quince, etc. But really, for me, this is a wine designed for the sides. this wine is the bit that suits the bits around the turkey. It will go beautifully with the turkey and nicely with the gravy, but it's built for your parsnips and your roast potatoes, and your bread sauce and all those bits and pieces. So that was my pitch for that. What do you think, ladies?
I agree. The nuttiness is delicious. I mean, I've just popped in the chat and I saw that Alex earlier on had commented about it being quite nutty. I think it's quite like almondy and hazelnuts. There's lovely sort of maybe some macadamia as well. And I would say that, you know, if you are having poultry as your main event, but you're maybe having to cater for someone that is not having meat, then if you are having a nut roast, this would be an excellent one. But it's got a lovely sweetness that's not really sweet. You know, it's just that lovely, like honeyed, ripe, really rich and delicious. I think a few people were saying that it's one that really calls out for food in comparison to the Pinot Blanc, and I agree. But yeah, it's I really enjoy it.
I have to say, I agree. It is very, for me, it's kind of hazelnut, really. And parsnips and hazelnuts, as you say, are always something that I thought go really well together. I think it would work perfectly with a nut roast. Now, I know we're talking about birds tonight, but I do think with a nut roast. And I was kind of thinking about it. I think with things like goose, I'm not sure that it would be so
I don't think it's got enough.
It's not got enough acid to it. But with the turkey, because turkey can be quite dry, it's got a bit more richness, and I think it would kind of just soothe a turkey.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is a chicken and a turkey, and yeah, perhaps something on the lighter end. It hasn't got enough of that acidity to cut through the really fatty birds for me. But you know, that's part of the beauty of Marsanne. It is what it is. It's never going to be a high acid variety. I like that I think the limestone soils are giving it a bit of a freshness sense, but it's not making my mouth water and salivate. It's more like a perceived, almost sort of fresh spice, but it's not actually making my mouth water.
It's got lovely structure. It's a really nice wine. They're both lovely wines, but
but without further ado,
yeah, we've got my Cambria estate there.
And for any members who were talking about the ageability of this wine, yes, it will age. I think Marcel's been relatively conservative about the aging window. I can't remember what it was. I think it was, in fact, I can pop it up. Yes, I think it is unfined and unfiltered, to Phil, who's asked. And it's obviously had that long lees stirring. So the gross lees have dropped down, and it will have aged on the fine lees, and then I don't think they've filtered it. They'll have just racked it off.
Mine's a little cloudy too, so it's
it's certainly in keeping of the style. It's what we refer to as sort of a minimal intervention. Actually, both of mine are tonight. So Marcel said to 2028. I think that's fair. It will go more honeyed. And like more nutty, and it will lose some of the fruit. So it's up to you whether you find that attractive or not. I think it's drinking well now. I probably personally wouldn't keep it ages and ages and ages for Christmas dinner, but I might for, I don't know, something slightly different, something with nuts, probably like a chestnut pork-based dish. So Emma, over to you for the last.
My turn. So I have chosen my favourite grape variety, and Chardonnay is something we have every Christmas, because Chardonnay is one of those wines where if everything's going very pear-shaped, you've got the usual family arguments going on, the turkey's not quite cooked as fast as it should have done, and you're just thinking, right, time out, I just have a large glass of Chardonnay. If it's got oak to it, even better. So this one really fit the bill. So this is Cambria Estate, Catherine's Vineyard, Santa Maria Valley Chardonnay. It's 2019 vintage. So Santa Maria Valley is the northernmost part of Santa Barbara County in California. It's a single vineyard wine, and it's what they call the winery, which I think is lovely, refrigerated sunshine. So it's got Santa Maria Valley's kind of ocean influence. They've got the really warm sun, and then they've got the cool breeze that comes in off the ocean, and the cooling fog that comes in off the ocean as well, which helps to really slow down the ripening process. But it also just gives you a bit more of that kind of, that slightly leaner style, that more acidity, kind of more minerality to the fruit, which is, I think, is lovely. The vineyard's named after Cambria Estate's owner, Katie Jackson, and was planted in 1986. So it's some of the oldest vineyards, and it's on some of the most ancient soils in the area. So fossilized seashells, shale, limestone, and sand. This is their flagship Chardonnay. So 75% of the wine is barrel fermented. So you get that oak and vanilla and kind of creme brulee kind of flavors to it. And then 25% fermented in stainless steel, which give you the kind of more lemony citrus and kind of apple and baked apple flavors. 75% went through malolactic. So as Anna said before, it's when you're getting a lot more of that kind of creamy, kind of milky acidity. And then you've got the wine was aged sur lie, so on its lees for 9 months with barrel stirring to give it a bit more texture. And 20% aged then in new French oak, which gives you more taste, more vanilla, and kind of a little bit of that spice as well. My reason for pairing it with turkey is one of the things we come up with again and again and again when we're talking about food and wine pairing is matching your weights. So your weight of your food and your weight of your wine, you want them to be fairly similar. Otherwise, one will overpower the other and there kind of becomes no point. So this is a white, obviously, but it's oaked and it's got enough body, I think, to really work with, because it's not the turkey that's the problem, it's all the sides. I haven't tried it with, I do have cranberry sauce on my plate, and I haven't tried it with the cranberry sauce, partly because I wanted to give my plate a bit of colour. But with things like bread sauce and the sprouts, which I always do, well, normally at Christmas I'll do with chestnuts, pigs in blanket in turkey, all of that kind of stuff. It will go with parsnips, it will go brilliantly well, I think. Also kind of reading up on turkey, I think best rule in the world, turkey can be really quite dry. So we alluded to this earlier with Anna. So having a wine which is kind of very fruity or kind of juicy almost adds that kind of sauce character to the wine as well, to the food as well. And Victoria Moore, because I was looking in her book today, because I was thinking, what am I going to say? She said something which I really loved, which is your first duty of the wine is not necessarily to go with the food, but with your mood. So you drink the wine that makes you happy at that point in time. And I think this is perhaps why I always go for oak Chardonnay, because I always joke that oak Chardonnay will just soothe, even if the kitchen's on fire, just have a little glass of oak Chardonnay and it'll all be okay. So I'd be really interested to hear what you all think. What do you think, fellow birds?
I love it. I love it, Emma. One of the reasons that I had to choose, I say had to, it was a fun experiment. But one of the reasons that I had such fun choosing the Saint Joseph is because Emma chose the Chardonnay first. And I think you chose a brilliant one. I will say that. It's got enough freshness that I think maybe was lacking in mine. I do think it's slightly sweeter than mine, which is when I put the tasting order together, I put it last, because I do think it's got that kind of nuanced, very, very fruity, like you say. But hearing you explain why you picked a fruity wine, I think you're spot on. I think it's a really good choice.
Thank you.
I agree. And I would say I've just been... obviously I've got to get through my big plate of pigs in blankets, and so I've been eating them along with this. And I would say that because this wine is so lovely and fruity and it's such tropical fruit, it goes really well with the slightly smoky bacon and the pork, almost a little bit like a ring of pineapple on as some gammon does. So that lovely sweet and salt combination, the lovely fruity freshness, and talking about it with going with turkey and how you cook your turkey. The way we do it is we cover ours with streaky bacon to start with, and get it lovely and try and keep some of that moisture in, so it has a lovely bit of flavor to the skin there as well. So I can see that really, really working. But this is delicious, and I'm very pleased that you chose it, Emma. I do hope, members, that it's not quite your favorite, but it's delicious.
I hope maybe you like it, but not the best.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I really love it because it's got that it has got that overt Californian style, but it's not kind of, I'm old enough to have known the kind of Californian Chardonnays from the 80s, where I used to go, it tastes like there's literally been a tree that has just been dipped in this wine. This one's got more, it's got more minerality and there's more complexity there. So it's, the oak is there, but it's not the only thing about the wine. There's a lot more going on to it than that. So yeah. It makes me smile. So it's perfect.
There we go, job done. And for members that don't know, I've had a relatively easy day today, but Emma's had a child that didn't go to sleep this afternoon, and Catherine's been doing a members lunch. So I think probably out of all the wines, you three are now going, the soothing calmness of an oaked Chardonnay. Now the world is right.
temporary silence in the house until she wakes up again. So I'm like, life is okay.
But that's what Christmas Day is about, right? It's finding that moment.
So I think
you're next, Emma.
One as well, isn't it? Because I was the only one who went for a rosé, which is fair enough, because there aren't many people who drink rosés in winter. But I always say rosé is for all year, not just for summer. So with that in mind, I chose the Rosé de Zinamavro from Themiopolis, 2013. This is made by Apostolos Themiopolis in northern Greece, in Nausa, and he's really known as the kind of the guru, the maestro of Zinamavro. He's absolutely amazing. He's made it his life work to produce really high quality Zinamavro and really show what it can do. Nausa's got a very warm continental climate, so you've got the cooling winds. As you can see, it's quite mountainous, so the cooling winds coming either from the Vermio mountain or coming in off the sea. These lower temperatures that are linked to the vineyard's high altitude and the big diurnal range that they have during ripening, so the kind of the difference between the daytime and the nighttime temperatures, it gives a lot of freshness and a lot of elegance to the wines. The grapes for this wine come from several parcels of non-irrigated young vines around the village of Patia. They're vines which, once fully mature, they'll be used to provide fruit for their flagship blend, Red Earth and Sky. So in the meantime, he uses them to make his rosé, which I think is lovely. The grapes are hand-picked, they're destemmed, they're macerated for 12 hours, they're fermented with wild yeast in stainless steel tanks for between 5 and 6 months. So it's all kind of very kind of slow process, but it's kind of that strange one of quite hands-on, but also quite hands-off at the same time, quite natural winemaking. He very much, again, he uses wild yeasts and stainless steel because he really just wants the Zinamavro to shine through. They spend 4 months in 500 litre second use oak barrels just to give it a little bit more spice and a bit more texture. And in terms of rosés, this one is it's a really serious grown-up rosé that shows what rosé can do. I mean, I love rosé, so I drink rosé by the gallon in the summer, and it's the kind of cheap and cheerful rosé that you quaff because the sun is shining. But this is a rosé that kind of more bridges that gap between kind of serious red wine, serious rosé. Put it on because in terms of food and wine matching, if I'm ever asked, what would go with this, my first thought is always rosé. Would a rosé work? If you're ever unsure, rosé is quite often the answer to your question. It really works practically with everything. So this one's very dry. So it works kind of with anything that's savory, which isn't too spicy. It's also got really lovely acidity to it, which I think would mean that it would probably work with the goose.
Yeah.
And possibly the duck as well. Which I do have duck, and we're planning to have it later. Oh, you've got your duck. Thank you, Anna. You can taste it for me. Yeah, so Stuart was saying it's a kind of sun-dried tomatoes, and it does. It's got that kind of, it's that really savoury, kind of slightly umami kind of flavour to it, which just quite dangerous because you just keep going back for another little sip, and then you realize the glass is finished, and then you're like, oh, I'll just pour a little bit more, and then you realize the bottle's gone. So in a way, probably perfect for Christmas.
It's a very serious rosé, but it's very quaffable. It's a lovely combination of a wine, and that sun-dried tomato, absolutely. I remember tasting this in our tasting room with Matthew Horsley, our buyer, and we both had the same, not quite as sophisticated a tasting note, but we both had that note of own brand tomato ketchup, that lovely, slightly sweet, that vinegary thing, or perhaps if you're thinking a bit more towards like a raspberry vinaigrette over a salad. But I think this might be my contender of a wine for my leftovers Christmas sandwich. That you have in the evening, that, you've got a bit of everything in there. Really delicious wine.
It would definitely elevate a Christmas sandwich, wouldn't it? Actually, while you're talking, I was thinking, actually, it would really go well with a duck salad.
I've just had it with the duck, and it was incredible.
Really?
The two things that I don't think we've been able to handle up until this point have been the cabbage. My red cabbage hasn't worked as well as I'd hoped with any of the wines, and the duck, and they've both worked beautifully with this. I think it's got that tart acidity to go with the duck. And Catherine, you've just mentioned vinegar, but we're not talking about it being vinegar, right? We're talking about having that kind of like bitter, sweety, sour thing going on. And that's what's so hard to make work with cabbage, and it's happened. It's lovely.
Amazing. It's interesting actually, because Philip was saying they had it with pork and an almond cream, mushroom and tarragon sauce, and it worked really well as well, which really tells me that these rosés, which and John was saying, I hate rosé, but I might have to change my mind. I think this rosé it's a different beast altogether, and it's so much more versatile than you think. I've kind of lost my, as I've gone down, but is it Peter who was saying that he normally drinks rosé? Yeah, Peter was saying he normally drinks Tavel rosé in winter, which I do as well, but this is a good alternative, I think. So
do you know what? I think it has got that the thing where it differs, if members haven't got it and are interested to know the difference between something like a Tavel, this has something almost more citrusy about it than a Tavel. Tavel, I immediately think of red fruits, and I think of summer pudding type red fruits, but it's still very red. But there's something about this rosé that is not, it's not even in the red fruit sphere. They're a touch of cranberry, which I think is why it's so clever, but
I think it's got that sort of that red grapefruit sort of blood orange, that it does have that lovely citrus lift to it, while still having a red flavour, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. Blood orange is right for me. I get that. And it has that red fruit, but it straddles, and it has that savoury, back to that kind of umami kind of thing that just makes you keep going, ooh, I'm gonna go back and go and have another little taste of it.
It's a very special wine. I'm annoyed.
I'm also jealous, because I do also love to choose a rosé, and I feel I've gone quite traditional with the wines that I've chosen this evening, which is a bit unlike me, but we've got some good contenders here.
We do, and so different.
The ideal Christmas really is just to have all 6 of them.
On that note, we were going to save this question till the end, but since we're talking about having all 6 of them, I think we're about to move into territory where we might know the answer to this question. So we have had one question in the Q&A from a gentleman or lady, actually, it could be, called Alex Cook. Question for the end potentially, but I am going to ask it now. Are any of these wines well suited to have with your starter or pre-turkey events?
I suppose the key thing is, what is your starter? My family, we don't really go for a starter, because we go for big bowls of twiglets and other nibbles from about 10:30 in the morning. So I would say absolutely the rosé with a big bowl of twiglets,
that would be perfect.
And some savoury snacks. If you Emma, you have a starter. What's your go-to starter for Christmas?
Mine's always, I'm so traditional, I'm quite embarrassed. We have smoked salmon blinis. It's just what we do. And we normally have eggnog first thing, and then we move on to smoked salmon blinis. I think the Pinot Blanc would work with the smoked salmon. I think it would be, but for us, that would work really well. But I'm trying to think of what other.
We're of salmon mousse kind of family, something like a salmon terrine. Or actually in recent years, we've started just doing eggs, like scrambled eggs in the morning with either truffles or salmon. So actually doing that at sort of 11 o'clock in the morning once everyone's reasonably sensibly dressed. So actually I think if I was going to go for the truffles, I'd probably do exactly that. My truffle eggy thing, I'd be going for 2 and 3, one of Emma or I's. And then for the salmon, I would be going with 1. But I still say as an all-rounder, I think you'd be hard to beat number 4, especially if you were doing, I know a lot of families, my husband's family eat quite late in the day, and then they have, canapes kind of coming throughout so from about lunch onwards. For me, actually, the rosé would be best with that if you were planning on sharing it with people who are into their wines. Because I do think this is a rosé that I know we were saying you quaff it, but the last thing you want is, your 17-year-old niece chugging it back in the corner.
Your 18-year-old niece.
18-year-old niece. Sorry, Catherine. They would not be doing that. But yeah, I think for people that are into their wine, and if you're having good wine appreciators, I actually think getting people to try the rosé with a load of canapés would be amazing. For me, that's the all-rounder.
Yeah, I think, as you say, that it has to be a very personal Christmas. If you've got the whole family, especially my family, I'm looking for stuff that's not going to break my heart when they just pour another glass and pour it down their throats, and they'll be like, "You can't appreciate that wine."
What's bad? I was going to say, Emma, we've had this conversation before, you and I. There's wines we want to have at Christmas, and then there's wines we feel comfortable serving at Christmas.
Exactly. There's a big difference between the two.
So Alex said that they're a snacking family before dinner. So the only other thing I would add in terms of dependent on your snacks, if you were going for anything particularly within the cheese savoury, like cheese straws realm, I would go with the Chardonnay. I think that would be a really, really beautiful combination, and one I might do this year.
Yeah, I would actually, I'll pull myself out the race. My wine is not a starter or nibbly wine. It's too rich and too nutty and too intense. So unless you're going to have truffle eggs Benedict or something like that, then, or whatever it is with truffles, then probably not the second one, or a nut roast feast. It's not built for that. I would definitely go with one of the others for that. Right, Catherine, you're up.
I am with my second choice, which is one of my favorite wines. So it is it's a traditional wine, but one that when we were looking at sort of the wines that we could pick from based on sort of what we've got available and what was coming on as available for Christmas, I made a beeline straight for the Rioja, because it is a red that I absolutely love having anytime, but particularly I think it's really delicious with turkey. So this is the La Rioja Alta Viña Arana Gran Reserva Rioja 2015. And it is, we describe it as a benchmark traditional style Rioja. And if you are Rioja fans, you may be aware that they're made in the traditional styles, which have that little bit more savoury, a little bit more with this sort of oak and leather and those sort of spicy flavours. Or you can have modern styles of Rioja, which are a little bit fruitier, a little bit richer, a little bit denser in style. But this is the traditional one, which I think sometimes, you get to Christmas, it's an occasion that calls for some element of tradition. And if I can meet that tradition in the wine, then it gives me free rein to sort of go off-piste everywhere else. So La Rioja Alta are headquartered alongside the Bodega Smuga in the Barrio de la Estación, which is in the old railway quarter of Haro. So there we are on the map. And it's a popular location for wine exporters. It was a popular location, for wine exporters during the phylloxera crisis in France. La Rioja Alta is one of the most resolutely traditional of the region's bodegas. They were founded in 1890 by a consortium of 5 families, including the Aranas, Adanzas, and the Albadis, which their names have now been immortalized in their reservas. So this is the Aranas. And it now can commands an impressive vineyard portfolio of over 700 hectares, with 470 in the Rioja Alta, 65 in the Alvesa, where Barón de Oña is produced, which is another wine they make, 63 in the Baja, and 74 in the Galician denominación of Rías Baixas, and 95 hectares in Ribera del Duero. So they have really sort of spread throughout Spain, but you know, Rioja is their heartland. So as the company expanded, they sort of outgrew their premises in Haro, which is now where their corporate office is. They've got a visitor centre and a wine shop and a wine storage facility. So they've not lost that site, but they've just moved the main business to the purpose-built winery in La Bastida, which is about a mile down the road. And if anyone has ever visited, or if anyone wants to Google it after the event, it's very impressive as a building. It's a very stunning stone building, completed in 1996. And the fermentation tanks are set under the wooden floor of a stunning, like, light flooded hall. So the sparkling steel lids are visible, and beneath them is a huge barrel aging cellar. Now, it's reckoned that at any one time, La Rioja Alta have around 45,000 barrels on the go, and they carry around 8 years of stock. So because of that, they quite sensibly have their own coopering. They do that in-house, and they import their oak. So they use American oak, and they import it from Ohio and Pennsylvania. And there's little reverse traffic though. So most of the company's export market, or the second biggest export market after the UK, isn't US, but it's actually, well, it's not the US of A, but it is Mexico in South America. La Rioja Alta, they excel in classically styled reserves and grand reserves. They've got that lovely considerable cask aging. What does set them slightly apart from other traditional sort of bodegas is that they also retain that lovely fruit and vigor while the wines are undergoing their time in cask, and then they are released when they are fully ready to drink, and they've always got a bit of a graceful maturity about them. So the Viña Arana it's a blend of 95% Tempranillo and 5% Grapciano. So it's made in quite a supple Rioja claret style. So that kind of comes back to our claret question of earlier. If you were thinking that that claret is maybe your way to go, that you normally stick with, if you want to go for something that is sort of same but different, then this would maybe be one that I would consider going, because it's got that lovely traditional elements that you get with a claret, that lovely structure, lovely fruit, lovely bit of tannin there as well. And again, it's a serious wine. There's nothing too crazy going on, so you're quite a safe bet in that if you are serving one red wine to your party, this should hopefully fit the bill for everyone in terms of something they will like. I mean, I've never served it to someone and had them tell me they don't like it. So I think it is a really delicious contender. It has 3 years in cask and then 2 years in bottle. And the Tempranillo is the main component, comes from 3 vineyards, which is the Rodezno Las Cuevas, El Palo, and Las Moñas. And it's blended with the 5% Grapciano, which is from the Montechillo vineyard in Fuenmuea. The Tempranillo is what they pick first, and then about 20 days later they'll pick the Grapciano. So the Tempranillo ripens that little bit earlier, and then the the grapes are transported in refrigerated vehicles, because again they're wanting to preserve the integrity and the freshness of the fruit, and then they are sorted berry by berry. Now this vintage 2015 was the first year that they did that on an optical system. So the grapes met with the strictest quality requirements, and those were the ones that were used. And then this also undergoes malolactic fermentation naturally. So we've spoken about malolactic fermentation with the white wines, which might be something you're more familiar with, but also reds will undergo that as well, and it adds that lovely texture and a little bit of creaminess without it tasting creamy, but it does definitely feel it on the palate. And then it was February 2016, they carried out a selection of wine lots that were placed in the oak barrels. The oak had about an average age of 4.5 years, and again was made by their in-house coopers. And then they had it in the oak for the 3 years. They had traditional rackings every 6, and then the 2 years with the traditional rackings every 6 months by hand and by candlelight, which I think just adds an extra bit of Christmas magic to the whole proceedings, they bottled it in December 2019. So it's had that 5 years in total of aging, and now it is at the ready to drink, but it will still age. It will still have, it's got some time on it. It's got that structure, the fruit there. It's really lovely and elegant, really lovely garnet red. And it's lots of lovely red fruits, plums, blueberries, blackberries, and then you've got that lovely sort of caramel, cedar, a little bit of coffee, lovely serious vanilla, not any of your vanilla extract. This is straight from the pod vanilla. And again, some of those sort of baking spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, all of those sort of things, and a little bit of balsamic flavour there too as well. So it's lovely and fresh, lovely supple tannins. I think it's got a ever so slight bit of smokiness to it, which I think one of the reasons I chose it was looking at the sort of pairings that you're having, bacon around your pigs in blankets, if you've got bacon with your sprouts and chestnuts, the bacon that you put on the turkey. I feel there's a lot of smokiness, or perhaps even, if your turkey or your goose or duck perhaps stays in the oven a little bit too long and catches on the edge, if the skin catches slightly and gets that lovely smoky sort of burnished flavor, this is just a really, really lovely wine for it. And I think it's got enough acidity that for the richer meat, so maybe if you're looking to your goose and your duck, this will absolutely cut through, but still be a lovely, like, sort of fruity compote element to it as well. But ladies, what do you think?
Yeah, I can attest to the duck. It's wonderful. But what I would say is we haven't really talked about gravy very much. And I tried this with what was my fake turkey, so it's not even turkey, my chicken and gravy. And it went just as well with the gravy on the chicken as it did with the duck, which was obviously cooked in its own sort of juices, but didn't have a sauce.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite a testament to the wine. It can have both ends of the spectrum. But I do think the gravy was really important in that. It added something for this wine that I think it needed, that richness, that slightly earthiness, that balsamic character you mentioned. For me, I'm a big stickler for red onions in gravy. And I think actually that caramelized red onion thing is what made this particularly good with that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Somebody was asking, how do you guys feel that this one compares to the exhibition Rioja Reserve?
I know the answer to that question. The only reason I know the answer, well, I know the answer as in technically what the answer is. The only reason I know the answer is I did do an event and that question was asked before to the winemaker. So I can recite what I remember, which is that actually the Rioja, the exhibition Rioja that we have is actually the Vigna Alberdi. So it's a bit of a misnomer. So the La Rioja Alta name their Alberdi as a crianza, which for anyone who sort of knows a little bit about aging means only 1 year in barrel, 1 year aging required. It's actually not a crianza. They age it so that they can have the different levels. So the Rioja, the exhibition Rioja, which is the same as that Alberdi, has actually had 2 years in barrel. And it's 100% Tempranillo, so it's got none of the Graciano that this wine has. So shorter aging generally, slightly different vineyard plots. I'll tell you what, I'll put the link in the chat if anyone really wants the technical details. And then it's had 3 years total age instead of the 5, of which 2 were in American oak. There we go. I tried to give you a good answer and I really rambled.
No, that was perfect. That was more than I expected, actually.
I was going to say the short answer. This is Tempranillo and Graciano, slightly more complexity, longer aging, slightly more traditional. I think in some ways, am I right, Anna, that when you look at the Arana, the Albadis, and they do they have their other one. What's the name? I've forgotten it now, but the 3, it kind of goes in their kind of traditional in style. So this is sort of middle tradition.
Yeah. So they've got Ardanza.
Ardanza is the most traditional. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but interestingly, and I don't know whether I should say this or not, because I've just tasted this wine again and reminded myself how good it is. When we did have the winemaker on, he said that this vintage of this wine was the best he'd ever made.
Wow.
That beats his older, because the Ardanza, I think we've just finished selling the 2012. So for members that really do like a bit of age on their Rioja, that would have been the wine to get. But actually, he said that this particular vintage of this wine was the favorite wine he's ever made. So probably
Okay.
shouldn't have said it. I'll frantically put it in my basket after but it is so good. I mean, value for money as well. We talked about Bordeaux earlier. I think you can get really good value Bordeaux's. You have to hunt around a fair bit for them, or if you've bought them and kept hold of them, then fantastic. But I just don't know if there's anything as good a value as a Rioja like this in the world.
And that's a really good point. If you've bought it and kept hold of it yourself, yes, that takes forward thinking. They've done so much of that, aging, and it's ready to go. And yeah, I think it will develop, and it will, definitely have a little bit more time. I think Pierre's put about 2031, which again, could be a little conservative. But it's drinking beautifully now.
Yeah. And Rioja's not for everyone. I think that's the thing. It's I like to think of it as a crowd pleaser, but it isn't for everyone. But I do think it's got that lightness of touch for an old wine that is lovely with these kind of meats. Yeah. I think we're about to scare everyone by going on to my big heavy number. So members. I didn't show your picture, sorry, Catherine, of how beautiful their vineyards are.
That is beautiful.
Stuff against the mountain.
It's pretty stunning.
Isn't it just? So I'm going to go on to my final choice, and the final choice of the evening, which may come as a bit of a surprise for some of you who were expecting lighter styles of wine. And I did say at the beginning, I'm going to eat my words about heavier reds. But I chose this within good reason. Pardon me, Porcelainberg is a very special estate. It's owned by Buch and Hutzkloof, and it's managed completely separately. So even though they own it, it's got its own winemaker, a lady called Callie, and they're just dealt with as totally separate entities. But the reason I mention it is that for such a small operation, it has the financial backing of the very famous Buch and Hutzkloof estate. It's not something that does suit lots of light foods, and I did not build this for my chicken. I have gone for the duck, the goose, the dark bits of the turkey. I think pheasant would be beautiful with this wine if you do have pheasant at Christmas or even around Christmas. I know that we like to have pheasant at some point between, it often crops up a couple of times in December for special occasions and things. And if so, I think this works very well. For me, it's just the most fascinating wine, and more than anything, I just wanted to show members. The Swartland is in itself quite an unusual place. It's this huge mass here of green, and it used to be considered such a lesser region in South Africa, to the point where I'll show you a quick photo. It was desert, it was arid. Nobody really thought that you could grow vines here, there's no quality, should we say. The region itself, vast, unforgiving, but now there are top estates here. And this particular one is based just here in the south, not near Paarl because it's a huge expanse, but there are certain characteristics from being there. So it has some influence from the cooling breezes and the Cape Doctor winds, but not masses. We're still talking about a warm area. But as you saw from the pictures, there's lots of different terrains. It's almost like a rolling mountainous desert. For that reason, it's kind of off the beaten track in terms of the wine world. So if you wanted to visit here, for example, you would have to book. You can't just turn up. It's not like Franschhoek or Stellenbosch. So it's very special and unique winemaking going on in this part of the world. And what the winemaker here, and I call her winemaker, she's not really, estate manager, vigneron is probably a more accurate perception. It's very hands-off winemaking. We've mentioned all the way through this, they only do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They take 100% Syrah here. They leave them in whole bunches. They pop the whole bunches into either old oak or concrete. So we're not adding any sort of flavor introduced. What you're getting here is the purity of what has come off the vine into those vats. Natural yeast, so they don't even add anything to get the fermentation going. They just let it do its own thing. And the reason I mentioned the whole bunch fermentation is there's only a few grape varieties in the world you can do that with. And Pinot Noir is very popular and Syrah is the other in terms of red grapes. And I probably wouldn't, and I don't know what it tastes like, would have tasted like without the whole bunches, but I probably wouldn't have picked it if it weren't whole bunch. And why? That sounds really stupid, but whole bunch does some strange things to grapes. It does all sorts of weird things, like it extracts some color, it changes sometimes the alcohol, it affects the pH. But if you leave the chemistry aside, what really happens to this wine with the whole bunches is that it adds spice. So you get this unbelievably floral violet character that comes with, sorry, Callie is a man. Do you know what the worst thing is? I've seen a picture of Callie recently, Sophie, and I'm actually thinking of the Buckenhutscliffe man in that picture whose name escapes me. But yes, Callie is a man. I apologize. But what I get with this is violets, so masses and masses and masses of violets, which is really something you get in Northern Rhone Syrah. So I'm harking back to my Northern Rhone here. And the other fruits that I get on top of that violet are things like plum, loads of plum. So that's what's going to go with my duck. Cherry, black currants. But then it comes to this weird spice. So I'm getting cinnamon, I'm getting black pepper, I'm getting dried herbs like rosemary. I'm going to be honest, I just want to pour it on my food almost. I want to reduce this down and make the world's most delicious compote and put it on my duck or put it on my goose. Like Catherine's, it's also got that touch of smoke, which I can't really place because there's no overt oak influence here, but it still has got that slightly smoky character. And then the thing that might be scary if you think of Syrah, because it is generally a big blockbuster or can be a big blockbuster wine. If you're thinking about Syrah here, those whole bunches have helped sort of with the acidity for various reasons, pH being one of them. But it has got a really interesting freshness. And then because it's got a bit of age, the tannins have also softened as well. So I'm going to go for a taste, but just on the aromas alone, it's sort of blowing my mind. So I'm going to go for a taste. So it's got for me this unbelievable kind of, mine's actually quite chilled, which is interesting. I didn't think I was going to like it chilled. This window happens to be freezing, for members who don't know, and I've never mentioned before. I don't know whether we've got a draft, I don't know. So this keeps my wines lovely and cool. And it's actually more chilled than I thought it would be at this stage in the evening. And I don't know whether it's just because of that, but it's incredibly fresh. I've just seen the members finding it very closed. Give it a big swirl, because I mentioned at the beginning, this is the wine that needs the air. If I was serving this properly, I'd have put it in a decanter. It really needs a bit of oxygen to get going. But in terms of structure, quite soft and slightly fine-grained tannins, but they're not mouth-filling, voluptuous tannins. It's got body, it's got weight, but that's not coming from very, very heavy tannins. And then it's got this lovely sort of, freshness and lift and really elegant aroma to the end of it. It's almost like if some of those Northern Rhone wines are very polished, but often their beauty is in that they're kind of rough and ready, but really, really gorgeous. This is sort of like if one of them put on a nice dinner jacket. That's what it feels like. It's sort of a polished version of a vigneron from the Northern Rhone, and I just think that's amazing.
It's a Rhone in a velvet dress. It's in
a velvet jacket.
I think you had it spot on, Anna. I think talking about wanting to make it into a compote. For me, I think that my overarching sort of thought about this is like, wow, it's like the best blackcurrant cordial I've ever had that also happens to be a wine. It's just so sort of, and it's got a thickness to it, a really sort of viscous lushness to it that's really, really pleasant. I mean, I don't think it would work for me for the lighter poultry, but I think definitely with your goose, your duck, definitely with those ones that are like fattier or perhaps the darker meat, so turkey legs perhaps, if you're going to, or depending on, because we've not touched too much on how you actually cook your birds, but if you were going to go for some sort of confit element, or you know, anything that's a little, that really retains the fat and the freshness to the meat, this really delicious. And
if anyone's purchased one of those green eggs and is planning to barbecue a bird, I feel like this would be a really good barbecue barbecued goose wine.
Something with a little bit of smokiness as well. I think Catherine's point, that it is velvety. The texture is very velvety. It's plush. It kind of is kind of like teddy bear's feet. It is a big wine. So a couple of people have said, gosh, I wouldn't drink that this year. I would keep it for another few years. And I have to say, I probably would do the same. I would keep it for a bit longer, but I think it's a lovely wine. And I do think it has an element of that Northern Rhone, which I love, that Northern Rhone Syrah kind of slightly animaliness that you get. But it's a little bit tamer. It's a very interesting wine. For me, it's quite young still. And it's 2017, isn't it?
I know, and you know, we're selling 3 vintages of this at the moment in a little mini vertical, and you can buy the mixed case. And this is the youngest of them, and I think this has got, you know, a long time on it. So
yeah, it's got bags going for it. So it'd be really interesting to see how it does it. But very delicious wine.
I think it's the kind of wine that it would be great if you could afford it, to buy a couple of cases and just lie them down and try one bottle every year, which I've never really succeeded with, because I've gone, oh, that's nice, and opened the rest of them. But, you know, it would be really interesting to see how this developed. It's lovely. Yeah.
And I think that was lovely as well. Well, it was an opportunity where I knew we were going to be repacking these wines, and I knew it wouldn't go with turkey. That was a no-brainer, but I did think it would go with, and I have got the duck, and I tried it earlier, and I did love it. But it is for those people who want the darker red, you know, who want that richness with their meal. But I do also think this is a food wine. As much as I'd love to sit and enjoy it on the sofa, I can't afford to sit and enjoy a £59 wine on the sofa on a Thursday evening. So kind of took the opportunity to show this wine, even though it's definitely got a limited range of the foods of Christmas it would pair with. And it is your dark meats. If you're having beef, obviously this would go, that would be a no-brainer. But it is your pigs and blankets and all of that sort of stuff.
Your red cabbage as well. It absolutely is. It's it's there.
Well, it's got another bit of that balsamic thing that you had actually in your last one, Catherine. So for me, that's where the red cabbage comes to shine. I usually put lashings of port in my red cabbage. Does anyone else do that, or is that just me?
Yes.
Good. Mine is usually sort of a little bit of stock and a hell of a lot of port. Anyway, that's how I make my red cabbage, and I think this would work with that. You'd need something to stand up to it.
Sounds lovely.
So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to chuck the poll on. Like I said, if you're in a group, you'll definitely get multiple votes. But if you want to do 2 votes, we won't mind. There are 3 of us, so choose wisely. But I will pop.
That sounds very threatening, Anna.
No, I think I've actually got my favourites this evening. They're not necessarily my own. But I think what's nice is we sort of went through lots of different styles of a Christmas dinner. And I also like that we didn't all go same. We could have all gone for a rich, unctuous white wine that would have been, you know, easy to pitch across the board. And, you know, we could have had a very lovely, fine wine tasting, but it would have been of a similar ilk. But the fact that we had 6 such different wines makes me really happy.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been very easy to just go white burgundy.
Oh, I know.
White burgundy, red.
White and red. Yeah, white, exactly. And that's the thing. There's loads of stuff that we've missed off here, so it's worth saying that as well. There's masses that we could have done. It does all come down to personal taste in the end.
And it also, as you say, personal taste. It also comes down to you're doing you know, who's cooking? Whoever's cooking is doing all the work. And all the stress and all the hassle and all the sweating, is turkey going to come out moist and all the rest of it. Drink what you like,
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, just drink what makes you really happy, because Christmas is supposed to be a really happy time.
Couldn't agree more.
So maybe if you've not found your turkey wine, you've found, if you're the chef, you've found your tuck it in the cupboard and dip in every now and then while everyone else is.
Absolutely.
Your pre-dinner cooking wine or your post-dinner, everyone's gone to bed now. Right. So on that note, I am going to, in fact, actually, before I launch the answers, and before I tell you how to find the wines and etc. What was your favourite, Catherine, this evening? One of your own and one not of your own.
Okay. So my own favourite would be the is the Rioja. And my favourite that is not my own is the rosé. I just think it's delicious, such an all-rounder.
And Emma, the same question to you.
Oh, this is tricky. There's a few I really like, actually, and there's a few I haven't had before. I haven't had that Syrah before. I think my own favourite is probably going to be the rosé, for interest. The Chardonnay, if I'm in a bad mood.
Oh, so you pick both of your own. Fine, we'll let you have it. Got a screaming toddler. She's allowed to do whatever she wants.
For the other one, I think the Marsanne.
Okay.
The Roussanne, sorry. No, it's Marsanne.
No, Marsanne, you're right.
Marsanne.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I got an extra vote, because I will say that the Marsanne did come last.
What was yours, Anna, though? Anna, your favourite?
Well, I've seen the answers already, so I was going to reveal and then tell you mine. But it looks like the top white was Catherine's, and the top of the three others was Emma's. Yay. So Emma's Greek Rosé was the overall winner. If I had to pick from mine, I would probably also go Marsanne. I think for the meal, the Marsanne did really work as more of an all-rounder, whereas the Syrah was definitely limited. And then I think of everybody else's, I would normally, as you know, Emma, have gone for a Chardonnay, but I think I would go actually for Catherine's Rioja. So,
which was lovely as well.
Well, what a way to spend a Thursday. I think we've all tried something new, and certainly had a bit of an experiment and a bit of chinwag along the way. So thank you very much, ladies, for giving me well over an hour and a half. But thank you, members, for joining. We'll be sending a link around with all of the links to all the wines that we've spoken about this evening. Also, if you bought a pack, you'll be getting a discount code as well. If you did buy all of the wines in bottle, please message me, because I can't automatically give you a discount code. But obviously, if you bought them in bottle because you were sharing, then we can give you something. I just need to do it manually. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. I hope you have a lovely rest of the evening and a lovely weekend. And I hope your December festive celebrations have kicked off with a bang.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.